Welcome back to Open Line at WOSU 820. This hour we'll talk about the importance of nature and the fate of our planet, about our interdependence with the plants and animals of the earth and the earth itself. My guest, environmentalist David Suzuki, told a Canadian broadcast audience in 1988 that the basic life support systems of our planet were being destroyed at an alarming rate and on a massive scale. So 16 years later, where do we stand now? Is Earth, to coin a phrase, in the balance? Are we doing a better job of helping our planet flourish? My guest is a leading environmentalist and geneticist who has received consistently high acclaim for his ability to explain the complexities of science in a compelling and easily understood way. You've seen David Suzuki's public television series, The Secret of Life, on WOSU TV 34, and his series, The Brain, on the Discovery Channel. He's the author of more than 40 books, including The Sacred Balance, A Tree, and Good News for a Change. His new book is David Suzuki, The Autobiography. Welcome back from the San Francisco Bay Area this morning. David Suzuki, good to have you here.
Good to be here.
That 1988 CBC radio series called It's a Matter of Survival.
Yes.
You interviewed, you say, 150 scientists and experts, very life support systems of the planet destroyed at a horrifying rate and on a grand scale. Well, how are we doing now, 16 years later?
Well, I mean, we're continuing on the same path. We are undermining the life support systems, and I don't know if you've seen what's come out in the last couple of weeks. The report, the study, the 4-year study on the state of the ocean's fishes.
Yes.
And it's absolutely catastrophic. They're now predicting that every single edible fish that we use will have collapsed by 2048. There was a report that came out 3 weeks ago that looked at human predation. That is, we cut trees down and we take fish and we put carbon dioxide into the air. And if all of human activity, what we take out of our environment, can be replaced by nature in a year, if what we take in a year is replaced by nature in a year, then presumably we could do it forever. That's sustainability. But what they find is that it takes 1 1/3 year for nature to replace what we take out in a year. And this is deficit spending. We're using up our natural resources. And we've been doing this for over 20 years now. That is taking more in a year than nature can reproduce. And by 2050, at the rate we're going, they say it will take 2 planets to provide us with what we demand. So obviously we're just using up the natural capital of the earth. And we call it economic progress. I don't get it. We're polluting the atmosphere, so the climate is changing. We're depleting the oceans. We're destroying the forests. We're polluting the air, water, and soil. And we all do this in the name of economic growth.
And, of course, just on a practical level, it's going to cost us greatly on the economic level.
Oh, I mean, there was a report that came out from an economist, Sir Nicholas Stern, in Britain, that looked at the cost of doing or not doing anything about climate change. And what he says is that it will cost us, if we don't do anything about climate change, it's going to cost us of the order of $7 trillion to try to deal with the consequences of that. He says it will be more expensive to deal with the effects of climate change than the cost of World War I and World War II put together. And yet you have a country, the biggest polluter of the atmosphere in the world, the United States, that is refusing to even sign the Kyoto Protocol, which is the attempt to begin to cap our emissions and bring it down.
What you talk about the general scientific illiteracy of many people, and in fact, the Canadian Parliament. You said when people have been tested in the Parliament, members of the Parliament, they don't know a great deal about science. Is it illiteracy? Or do people of the various nations, the governments, understand what's going on?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question, because Britain has certainly taken the threat of global warming very, very seriously. They have set a target of over an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. And it was Britain that asked this economist, Sir Nicholas Stern, to examine the economic costs of climate change. And I think that they've taken it very seriously. So has France, and so have Germany, because they have a long tradition of science. You think of England, you think of Charles Darwin, you think of of Sir Isaac Newton. You think of some of the greatest scientists were English. It's a part of their culture. And I don't understand why the United States, I mean, this year, the United States won every single science Nobel Prize. Science, you know, the United States is a leading country in the area of science, and yet you have the president who has been advised by the National Academy of Sciences, the leading scientist in the United States, saying that global warming is a far greater threat to American stability and survival than terrorism, that you've got to do something immediately, and yet he's even denying that climate change is real. What's going on? I don't get it. The indication in Canada when we did this is back in the 1970s, was that when we looked at members of Parliament in Ottawa, over 70% of them came from business and they came from law. That was their background. When we gave 50 members of Parliament a simple test for their comprehension of science and technology, it was business people and lawyers who scored absolutely rock bottom. So what does that mean? It means that we elect people to office who are scientifically illiterate, and they're going to have to make decisions about what we do about global warming, what we do about toxic pollution, what we do about the depleted ocean reserves, what we do about deforestation, about stem cell research, about cloning. How can you make informed, thoughtful decisions if you're scientifically illiterate? So this is the problem we face, is that our elected representatives are a reflection of the general population. If the population is scientifically illiterate, we can't make really informed decisions.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think the general population in the United States and Canada is scientifically illiterate?
Because we are failing to make science a fundamental part of our educational system. We talk about the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic. Well, science should be one of the most fundamental things that we learn, because science is the most powerful force that shapes our lives today. Science, when applied by industry, medicine, and the military, have reverberations that rattle through our lives. You know, when I was born in 1936, when I was a child, there were no computers, there were no jet planes, there were no satellites, there were no transistors, there were no Xerox, oral contraceptives, organ transplants. I mean, you think of the way that our lives have been changed in the last 65, 70 years by science. Our lives in society have been transformed beyond recognition. Well, surely as we go our way into the 21st century, we've got to be scientifically literate so that we can avoid the terrible problems that result from the application of science and technology.
As you point out, we generally embrace technology because they do things for us that are very practical,
yes,
but we don't think of the side effects. We don't plan for them.
Exactly. And we've got lessons here that should teach us to be more careful. I mean, Rachel Carson in 1962 wrote Silent Spring, and, you know, when DDT was found to kill insects, we thought it was the greatest thing ever going. The man who discovered it won a Nobel Prize in 1948. We thought DDT was great. When Rachel Carson came out with her book, the chemical industry just attacked her as an old maid, hysterical, didn't have the scientific credibility, and of course she was right. And DDT ought to be a warning to us that technology is very powerful, but there are unexpected effects, and we've got to be more careful. CFC is the same thing, and I'm sure the same thing is going to happen with genetically modified organisms.
Well, yes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, if generally the population in North America is not literate scientifically, if it is because we do not educate in schools, and therefore we elect people who themselves are scientifically illiterate and expect them to deal with these technological and environmental changes, that's not a very optimistic scenario, huh?
It's a very frightening scenario, because what happens with politicians? They make decisions then that are based on political considerations, and I use this in the most pejorative way. It's about power politics and who has access to our politicians, especially in the United States, a tremendous amount of lobbying that goes on. Well, this is the system that we've got. If the people that pay for people to run for office get their candidates elected, they have direct access to those politicians. If I give someone $100,000 to run for office and he's elected, and I call him after he's elected, don't you think he's going to invite me into his office right away? Mm-hmm. And the lobbying power in the United States is immense. And we're basing our decisions not on informed, thoughtful consideration.
So maybe, given that, in terms of our Earth's environment, things are going to have to get a great deal worse before they get it all better.
Well, I can't imagine things getting worse. I don't know what it's going to take. When 20% of our children are growing up with asthma, that ought to tell us something about the air quality that we've got. When 1 out of 8 women is going to develop breast cancer, that's not genetic, that's environmental. What do we think? You know, breasts are made of fatty tissue, and a lot of chemicals like DDT and dioxin and dieldrin and PCBs, they're lipophilic. They like to go to fatty tissue, and that's why the breasts of women have become like the canaries in the coal mine. They're telling us something's wrong in our environment. What is it going to take when our oceans are collapsing, the climate is warming up? What is it going to take for us to pay attention? I don't get it.
I guess that's a rhetorical question. What is it going to take? Because I don't know the answer to that. Do you?
It's because we don't pay attention to scientists. Mm-hmm. For scientists have been telling us over and over again. You know, and I as a biologist, I think of our evolutionary history. Human beings arose on this planet 150,000 years ago in Africa. And when you think of the environment back then, human beings did not look very impressive. I mean, we were this two-legged, hairless ape surrounded by countless mammals of all kinds. Well, you know, there weren't many of us. We weren't very big or fast or strong. We were a very unprepossessing creature. We've had a remarkable history. How the heck did that two-legged ape take over the planet? Well, of course, the secret of our survival was a brain, and that brain gave us tremendous inventive ability, and the human brain invented this idea called the future. You know, the future doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is now. Mm-hmm. But because the human brain invented the idea of a future, we are the only animal that realized we can affect the future by what we do today. If we look ahead, see where the dangers are, see where the opportunities lie, then we can choose a path into the future that will give us a greater chance for survival. So foresight was a very human characteristic that gave us the advantage, and it got us to where we are today. And today we have all of the predictive ability of scientists and computers and engineers and telecommunications. And we need that foresight more than ever today. You know, for over 20 years, scientists in the United States were telling us that New Orleans was a disaster waiting to happen. When you build a city in the heart of hurricane country and half of the city is below sea level, you're asking for trouble. And they said eventually there's going to be a Force 5 hurricane hit New Orleans, and if you want to avoid a catastrophe, this is what you've got to do. And nobody did anything, and so guess what? The future happened, and we didn't pay attention, and Katrina happened, and disaster. So even though we're very sophisticated today, we need to use foresight more than ever. And our scientists have been telling us we're on a deadly path. And now we say, oh, but it'll destroy the economy. Oh, we can't do that. We're going to have to go out of business if we do that. So we're failing to pay attention to what scientists say. And we're failing to use the only survival strategy that got us to where we are now, the ability to look ahead.
David, in your new book, David Suzuki, the autobiography, you say you'd like to provide an action component. So for our listeners, what's the action component here? Here's the problem, and we're not using our foresight. What can we do?
Well, a lot of people, of course, they know that we're in trouble. They look around, they can see the changes, and they know something's wrong. And so they come to me all the time, and they say, well, what can I do? I'm insignificant. I'm one person out of 6.7 billion people. What difference does it make what I do? And they want to do something that will have an effect. So my foundation, the David Suzuki Foundation, got together with the Union of Concerned Scientists, this organization in the United States, and we said, where do individual people have the greatest impact on nature or the environment? And it was right away we realized it's what we eat, how we move, transportation, and where we live. So food, transportation, and housing is where we focused on, and we came up with a list of the 10 most effective things that every one of us can do. Now, I have to admit, when they came to me with the list the first time, I threw it on the floor. I said, come on, get serious. This is too easy. But then they showed me the scientific reasoning behind each of the suggestions, and I'm now convinced these are the 10 most effective things we can do. And they're very simple. If you eat meat, give up meat 1 day a week. You know, if you're a Catholic, you know that's the way it used to be all the time. If you take a car to work or school or play, leave the car at home 1 day a week. If we say try to make your house more energy efficient so you reduce your energy bill by 10%, well, you're going to make money then. When you're buying a new household appliance, a hot water tank, a refrigerator, an electric kettle, look at the energy guide that tells you how energy efficient that is, and get the most energy efficient appliance you can get. They're very practical, simple things, but they if many of us do it, we can have a real impact. We've got 300,000 Canadians who have now signed up and have said, I'm going to try to do at least 3 of these 10 things in the coming year.
And among the other 10 of the Nature Challenge, buy locally grown and produced food.
Yes.
Choose a fuel efficient.
Don't use pesticides around the house. Mm-hmm. And one of the most important things is to apply your democratic principles. Write politicians, phone them, go to all candidates' meetings and raise environmental issues. Each of us can have an impact, or has an impact, but we need leadership at the political level as well, because politicians have to show leadership. They have to begin to pass laws that encourage corporations to do the right things. We need leadership at that level, and we as voters have to begin to use that responsibility.
So if sufficient numbers of us did all these 10 things, plus contacting our representatives and would that make a big difference?
Of course. Mm-hmm. Could have a huge impact. And, I remind people that Margaret Mead said, never despair that a group of dedicated, informed individuals can make a difference. In fact, that's the only way change has come about. And I agree with her. It's got to start at the level of the grassroots, and we've got to show by what we want that we make change happen. Mm-hmm. And, in 1988, I interviewed a young American senator and for a radio series. And he sent shivers up my back. I had never met a politician that understood the environmental problems as deeply as he did. And at the end, and it was Al Gore, by the way. He was a senator from Tennessee at that time. And at the end of my interview, I put down my microphone. I said, Senator, how can journalists like me help politicians like you? And he said, don't look to politicians like me. He said, if you want to bring about change, you've got to convince the public there's a problem. Show them that there are things that can be done. Show them there are alternatives. And get them to care enough so they demand that change be made. He said, when that happens, every politician will jump on the bandwagon. And I'm absolutely convinced he was right, and that's what's got to be done. We at the grassroots have to begin to see what the situation is, look at the alternatives, and demand that our so-called leaders in politics and business begin to do the right things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And David, these 10 points of the Nature Challenge, they're in your new book, David Suzuki, The Autobiography. Are they also accessible online through the
Yes, you can find them at davidsuzuki.org, and right on the first page there's the Nature Challenge. We have a Nature Challenge for business, Nature Challenge for schools, Nature Challenge for kids. We're trying to get as many people to sign up as possible, because then if we get 1 million Canadians signed up, I'm absolutely sure I'll be able to take that to any politician and say, look, we've got 1 million Canadians already doing something. Will you sign? And every one of them will, as Al Gore told us. They'll jump on the bandwagon. You can find it also on the Union of Concerned website. I don't know what the actual name is, but
Union of Concerned Scientists.
You can find it. Yeah.
I think UCS.org. Yes,
yeah. They call it something else. It's not the Nature Challenge, but they have the list of those 10 things as well.
We're talking with biologist and environmentalist David Suzuki. You've seen his public television series, The Secret of Life, his series, The Brain, on the Discovery Channel, his new book, David Suzuki, The Autobiography. We're at 614-292-8513. Callers, thanks for patiently waiting here as we get through a great deal of important material. And now let's go to you. Matt is on the line. Hi, Matt.
Hi. Every week I throw away about 5 pounds of newspaper, which, as far as I know, and I wonder if you could clear this up, is torn out of the Canadian arboreal forest, which we are chopping down at an unreproducible rate. That really upsets me. I can't help but think that number 11 on your list should be stop buying newspapers and forbid the endless use of these flyers, especially around Christmas time. And everybody throws them away, yet they must do something, otherwise manufacturers and stores wouldn't pay to put them in. But the waste is appalling, and the arboreal forest is finite and probably has other things of a regulatory, climate regulatory function we simply can't afford to throw away.
David, tell us about that.
Well, I think your listeners raised a really important point, and that is that all things like newspapers and, what is really shocking to me is a lot of our temperate old-growth rainforest as well as boreal forest is going to make toilet paper. Do we insist on wiping our bottoms with virgin forest? I mean, this is crazy. We ought to have legislation that demands that paper, especially like newspapers and toilet paper and all kinds of things, is made of post-consumer recycled material. And we've got to look at our own habits. Toilet paper, there's all kinds of recycled toilet paper that's available. We ought to be demanding of our newspapers that they use post-consumer recycled material. And we ought to give incentives that allow corporations to get an advantage by using recycled material like this. But I think Matt, you also raise a secondary issue, which is the amount of packaging. My family many years ago decided that we had to reduce our garbage stream, and this was difficult for a few months, but this is a family of 4, we got our garbage reduced to less than 1 green bag of garbage a month. And I'm ashamed to say that about over half of that garbage that we do put out each month is still plastic that can't be recycled. And huge amounts of that plastic comes in packaging. In Germany, they have laws that say that the businesses cannot make packaging unless it's recycled or reused. And so we just need legislation that demands that this stuff is being recycled. And, it's all possible, but we need leadership on the part of government.
And as you suggest, we're probably not going to get that leadership unless we demand it. Is that right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Environmentalist David Suzuki with us, joining us from the San Francisco Bay Area this morning. His new book, David Suzuki, The Autobiography. And we're at 614-292-8513. David, before we go back to our next caller, we were talking about newspapers, and I told you I got, a certain newspaper at home, and I thought, well, I can recycle that. But you said do more than recycle. You say write the newspaper and ask them what kind of paper they're printing on, huh? And David, yes, do we have you here?
Yes, I can hear you. Can
yes,
you hear me?
Now we're fine, yes.
Okay. Well, the consumer can certainly exert pressure on the companies, and what you do is you complain, or you write to them, and get as many people to do that. That's how you bring the fact of the need for this approach to their attention.
Mm-hmm. Do you think any of the major newspapers that you know of in Canada or the United States are actually taking action here?
In fact, there were several years ago, one of the newspaper chains announced that they were going to use recycled newsprint, and I haven't followed up on that. But certainly, in 1988, when the peak of public concern over the environment happened, there were a lot of announcements like that and changes. But of course, during the Reagan years, everything slipped down and the environment passed out. But there were attempts in newspapers to do that. I might mention, by the way, now that I've said that the peak was in 1988, I want to remind your listeners that in 1988, a man ran for president of the United States, and he said if you elect me, I'll be an environmental president. His name was George H.W. Bush. And as soon as he was elected, he showed that promises made during campaigns don't mean a bloody thing. But that was a reflection of the fact that the public in 1988 was concerned enough to make the environment the number one issue of the time, and that's what we've got to do again today. It's coming very strongly with climate change. I hope with the Stern report on the economic costs of climate change and with the report on the depletion of the oceans.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go back to our callers here with Bill. Hi, Bill.
How are you doing?
Good.
You're talking about the this sustainability of things. Some of it, I think, is probably planned to be unsustainable. I don't know if you or your guest, either one, are aware. There was a deal. I think the deal got put on hold somehow between Monsanto and a company called Delta Pineland. Recently, they had come up with something called Terminator seeds.
Yes.
You're aware of that?
Yes.
Okay. Now that kind of stuff has to be put a stop to. The whole thing it's about money and politics. It has nothing to do with the companies solely. A lot of it ties into the globalization.
Yeah.
That's what this whole thing is about.
No, that you're absolutely right. Terminator seeds are the attempt to create plants that have a built-in gene that causes them to be sterile, so that you will ultimately become totally dependent on buying your seeds every year from the company that produces those seeds. But of course, the great fear, and I think an absolutely valid fear, is that once those seeds are grown out in the open, nature will find all kinds of ways to go around what we have designed so cleverly.
And everything on the planet will become sterile.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Monsanto promised us that when they had their Roundup Ready crops, that no, don't worry, it won't spread. You just have to put a little buffer zone around the fields and everything will be fine. Well, it turns out that they can spread very rapidly into the neighboring plant weeds, and that is just a lot of nonsense. So, yes, Monsanto, by the way, that the company that led the charge against Rachel Carson in 1962 was Monsanto. They haven't changed a damn bit in the 40-some-odd years since then. And the corporate agenda is a very, very destructive agenda. And all that's about is maximizing profit in the shortest length of time. It's got nothing to do with improving lives for human beings or protecting nature.
Bill, thanks for your call today. We're here with Mike. Hi, Mike.
Hi, I really appreciate the fabulous focus that Dr. Suzuki is making on education. That is obviously a lot has to go on, but I'm not hearing about two major stumbling blocks in educating the public about science, and that's that the public really doesn't understand that science is done by consensus, and that science has been politicized. Both the right and the left are guilty of this. If you don't like the science, you go off, make yourself a think tank, and come up with your own science. Can I hear something about that?
Yes. Well, you're absolutely right about that. Let me just back up a bit. I sat for 4 years in Canada on this. We have an organization called the Science Council of Canada that's supposed to look at the big picture for science and society. We looked at education in Canada. Now, in Canada, education.
Hi, I really appreciate the fabulous focus that Dr. Suzuki is making on education. That is obviously a lot has to go on, but I'm not hearing about two major stumbling blocks in educating the public about science, and that's that the public really doesn't understand that science is done by consensus, and that science has been politicized. Both the right and the left are guilty of this. If you don't like the science, you go off, make yourself a think tank, and come up with your own science. Can I hear something about that?
Yes. Well, you're absolutely right about that. Let me just back up a bit. I sat for 4 years in Canada on this. We have an organization called the Science Council of Canada that's supposed to look at the big picture for science and society. We looked at education in Canada. Now, in Canada, education is a provincial affair, and I'm sure it's the same in the United States. It's a state affair. And so for a federal organization to look at science education in Canada, it ruffled a lot of feathers because people said, hey, you're coming into our turf now. But in fact, the educators welcomed this overview, and what we came up with after 4 years was every school child should have 1 hour of science education from kindergarten to grade 12 every school day of the year. And we showed that it could be done. It wouldn't be economically disastrous, but nothing ever came of that. And that's the target that we need is for science to be a part of every school child's education from kindergarten through grade 12. That's not happening. What is happening, though, is that we don't look to science as the most credible way of describing the state of the world. We just, corporations see science as a threat, and so they have set up these right-wing think tanks. The fossil fuel industry has set up a group that is fighting against the scientific evidence on global warming. And so the public is left being very, very confused about what's going on. And I, as someone in the media, have seen when we have discussed the issue of global warming, well, we put somebody on, the scientist on, who says, yes, global warming's happening, we've got to do something right away. And then in the name of balance, we then put someone on who says, no, there's no evidence that it's going on. And to the public, it seems as if it's still a controversy. The scientists haven't figured it out yet. But the reality is 99% of the climatologists are on side saying global warming's happening, we got to do something. A handful of scientists, most of them paid by the fossil fuel industry, are saying no. And yet the media portray it as if it's 50-50.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks for your call. And that's a concern. I think, David, when we present, or when I present here on Open Line, this issue of global warming, I may present a skeptic now and then, but I make the point repeatedly that this is not an argument anymore. I mean, this is 99%, as you say, of climatologists. Global warming, due in great measure to human activity, is a serious, serious problem, right?
Yeah, I think what we should be doing more as journalists is saying, excuse me, but, we're going to put you on, Mr. Expert, but where are you getting your money?
Mm-hmm.
Trace the money. For years, the tobacco industry had its own scientists who said, no, there's no evidence that smoking causes cancer. And it was a very effective ploy. There's a very good group called, a website called DeSmog Blog. DeSmog Blog is all about tracking down the skeptics, the science skeptics, and showing where they're getting their money. And it's a very revealing website. And a lot of these guys are saying, we're going to sue the hell out of you. And the people at DeSmog Blog are saying, bring it on, sue us. And we're going to dig into your files in order to counter you. And nobody has dared to sue them. It's a very good website that shows all of these skeptics, well, most of these skeptics are being paid by industry.
DeSmog Blog. Some, I think, are very sincere, but you're right. Most are probably industry-related. Some of our listeners seem to have been convinced by some of these industry think tanks that, indeed, it is the scientists who have a political agenda here. How would you respond to that?
I don't get it. I mean, scientists go and do their work. It's true that scientists try to do their work often where they see money. If there's government money or corporate money to do certain things, scientists will often go to get the grants to do that. But in fact, there have been a number of books written showing that the Bush administration has politicized science tremendously, altering scientific reports so that they are not as strong on issues like climate change. I don't get what the scientific agenda is.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The political agenda of scientists is. I'd have to see what the claims are.
All right. Let us go back to our calls here with Paul. Hi, Paul.
Good morning, Fred, David.
Hello.
David, you stole all my thunder.
Good.
I have very little left to say, except that the concept of an hour a day in primary school and middle school, etc. I mean, I can't think of a better way to approach this. I mean, I happened to grow up in a family that was scientifically literate. I don't mean that, we all turned out to be scientists, but, you could have a discussion about DNA and everybody knew roughly what you were talking about.
Exactly.
It was carried forth kind of haphazardly through school, which was private Catholic, but, and I think pretty rigorous, and I was terrible at some things. I mean, chemistry, for the love of God, I can't, I still can't figure that out. But my point is that it's like reading, as you said, writing, arithmetic, all that kind of stuff. If you get kids, not just go collect some leaves and press them on paper. I mean, that's a good start if you're, 7 years old.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, I just think that somewhere around 6th grade or something, it seems to derail. Now, I don't know.
David, there's a feeling out there, I think, among the general populace that somehow science is more difficult to understand than our other intellectual pursuits.
That's right. And the other part that's terrible is that people have this idea, well, if you're no good in math, you'll never do science. Now, it is true, to be a scientist, you really need math. But math, for the vast majority of people, often becomes a block. Oh, God, that math stuff. I'll never be any good at science. That's absolutely untrue. I mean, if you get excited about science and want to go into science, the math part will come, and it'll be a part of your training. But science is an activity, as our caller says. To me, a child who finds a pupa of a butterfly and then brings it into the classroom, and the children watch that pupa eventually open up and give rise to a butterfly, that is one of the most profound experiences you can have. And that sense of wonder and awe is at the very heart of what science is all about. Looking at nature and finding out how nature does things is at the heart of science. But too often we teach science as this cut and dried thing. This is an experiment. This is what you have to do, and
yes.
And it's boring, and it turns kids off.
Right.
We're not teaching science the right way. But I think the challenge is that education is a state matter, and what you get are, if you want to teach biology, the only way to teach biology is that evolution is a part of biology. And I can't believe in the United States the terrible battles that happen then. You've got to teach creationism or intelligent design. Creationism and intelligent design are not science. It just doesn't belong in biology. Evolution is a fact. It's not a theory. It's a fact. We see evolution going on. The only thing that is questionable is, how does evolution happen? How did life originate? Those are scientific questions. But the whole issue of creationism and intelligent design muddy the whole picture, and I think it's tragic because it's not science.
David, how would you convince someone who sincerely, I've met people who sincerely believe they've studied from the Discovery Institute, the publications on intelligent design, and they find them, from their point of view, rational, and they say, well, we do think this is a scientific approach. What would you say to somebody who sincerely believes that?
No, I mean, I don't engage in that discussion. It's a simple fact that, sure, there are a lot of biologists with PhDs who are fundamentalists and believe in the biblical version of science, but that is a very schizophrenic approach, because if you're going to be a scientist, you don't discuss that kind of religious dogma. They're just different ways of looking at the world. I have no quarrel with someone that says that God created the earth in 7 days and blah, 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 and all of that. That's fine. You can believe that, but don't come and have a discussion about science. That's a belief, and science is a belief system as well. But if you're going to be a scientist, you have to accept the tenets of that belief system.
Biologist and environmentalist David Suzuki joins us. You've seen his public television series, The Secret of Life, on the Discovery Channel, The Brain, his new book, David Suzuki, The Autobiography. Back to our callers here now. Dave is on the line. Hello, Dave.
Yeah, I'm all in favor of educating the public and putting forth knowledge that will help to give people a better idea of what is taking place environmentally. But I have a real issue with the fact, and you were mentioning the lumber, the logging industry, and I can go to at least 5 major universities who will attest to the fact that there is more timber available now, more trees, more lumber available, in spite of all the housing development that's taken place in this country and Canada over the last 30 years. There is more lumber available now than there was 60 years ago, and that's a documented fact. And to say that we're using up the lumber and wood is one of our few renewable resources, and to say that American management, manufacturing in general, is ignoring that fact, I think is to do it a great disservice. And and also, as far as the Kyoto agreements are concerned, one of the primary factors of not signing on was the fact that the United States has to take full and entire blame of this, quote, pollution that's taking place, and it's all right for China to go ahead in its industrial surging now to go ahead and pollute.
That's not what the Kyoto Protocol is.
Exempt from a lot of those restrictions.
That's not what the
Kyoto... If you're going to have to play the field, let everyone play it equally.
That's not what the Kyoto Protocol was at all. I was there at the Kyoto conferences. The United States tried very hard to monkey wrench that whole process. There were a lot of lobbying groups there, fossil fuel industry, trying to get it off the rails. The whole point about Kyoto was that the industrialized world had created a problem with their industrial growth, the burning of fossil fuels. We had filled up the atmosphere beyond the capacity of all of the green things to reabsorb carbon dioxide, and CO2 was accumulating, as well as other greenhouse gases were accumulating in the atmosphere. Since the industrialized world had created the problem and continued to be the major contributors, the industrialized world said, we will cap our emissions and begin to bring them down a tiny, tiny way, 6% below 1990 levels by the year 2012. And at that time, when we had shown that we were going to cap emissions and bring them down, then by 2010, we would begin negotiations with the rest of the world, the developing world that was coming up. You know that China is going to pass the U.S. as the major polluter by about 2009, and they would be brought on board. But we have created the problem. It wasn't the United States alone that was going to be made to carry the can. The United States produced 22 to 25% of the greenhouse gases, the major emitter, but all the other industrialized countries, and they have all signed on, have said, yes, we've got a cap and begin to bring it down. But the whole idea was the countries that had created the problem would lead the way and show that we were going to cap. And if we don't meet these targets, why should China or India or Indonesia or Brazil pay any attention to the need to bring their emissions down? We had to lead the way because we had created the problem. So the people that keep saying, oh, well, it's not fair, the China and India aren't on line, fail to understand the reasoning behind the whole Kyoto process. Now, on the lumber point, the problem we face is that in Canada, I don't know how it is in the United States, in Canada we talk about sustainability of forests, and they are sustainable in principle, renewable. Why is it then that after all of the battles over old-growth logging, over 90% of all the trees cut in Canada are still from old-growth forests? They're not coming from second or third-growth forests. And the problem is the forest industry talks about plantations as forests. A plantation is not a forest. So what we're doing is we're trashing forests and we're growing plantations. And that means that biodiversity is disappearing, and we don't have the resilience that an old-growth forest does, because an old-growth forest is a community of organisms that are much of it is lost when you clear-cut and replace with plantations.
Caller, does that make sense to you, or what would you say?
Now, as far as clear cutting, most of American industry right now, I mean, they're not stupid. This is a renewable resource that they want for generations to come. We're into the third forest right now, and there is still more timber, more logs, more lumber that's available than 60 years ago.
I'm asking you, why is it
as far as the Kyoto agreements, it's still, China has no environmental protection requirements that even come close to what the U.S. industry has to come close to. And for that reason alone, why shouldn't the same standards apply to China? Because they're spewing out and polluting more, but nobody's tracking it. Nobody's watching it. And day by day, they continue to pollute more and more, and yet that all goes unchecked, and then who gets the brunt of it is the United States.
David, thanks for your thoughts. Appreciate your call. And next on the line is George. Hello, George.
Yeah, good morning, Fred, and a great guest. I concur also that we need to put more emphasis in our educational system on science, primarily because that way our students and our young citizens as they grow up will not be subjected to scientifically motivated political propaganda. Just like, for instance, DDT. DDT's been suspended for a number of time, and malaria has made a huge comeback, so much so that the WHO, under the United Nations, talking about reintroducing the use of DDT. True or false?
Yeah.
True, that's exactly right. And I'd like to ask your guest if he watched the Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth.
Sure.
Okay. Why is it in that movie that Al Gore's portrayal of global warming, and incidentally, just as a quick aside, 100 years ago in Albany, New York, they started keeping very intensive records of climatic temperatures, as you well know. The average then was 42.2 degrees, and today, 100 years later, in Albany, New York, same circumstances, 42.2. The bottom line here is in Al Gore's movie, not once did he mention solar activities and solar flares, solar cycles, as possibly the culprit behind a slight warming up that may or may not exist on the globe. I mean, how would your we've got a local guy that's an internet skeptic around putting on some evaluations of the data, a lot of which was drawn from Al Gore's movie, that clearly shows that there's some bad science going on. And just one last point, your guest says it's evil. It's just bad for corporations to finance private research, but no problem for universities to accept money confiscated by the government from these industries for government research that funds all kinds of activities, and they have, in fact, a vested interest in said research and those financial sources coming in. And finally, Kyoto Protocol, in my view, is just simply a way to shake down the producer nations to redistribute money globally.
David Suzuki, your thoughts?
Well, I don't even know where to begin on a response like this. First of all, I've always defended universities as a place where basic research goes on, where we have tenure, and so we're freed from all kinds of corporate pressures or political pressures. And one of the terrible aspects of universities is that universities, because they've had financial problems, have welcomed corporate money coming into the university, and it's changed a lot of the scientific practices in the university. But I've always felt that it's universities where government money, that is money coming from the public, comes to support basic research, and we're freed from the kind of commitments to another agenda. When you have a scientist working for the tobacco industry, or when you have a scientist getting money from the fossil fuel industry, it seems to me that it makes a lot of sense that...
And next on the line is George. Hello, George.
Yeah, good morning, Fred, and a great guest. I concur also that we need to put more emphasis in our educational system on science, primarily because that way our students and our young citizens as they grow up will not be subjected to scientifically motivated political propaganda. Just like, for instance, DDT. DDT's been suspended for a number of time, and malaria has made a huge comeback, so much so that the WHO, under the United Nations, talking about reintroducing the use of DDT. True or false?
Yeah.
True, that's exactly right. I'd like to ask your guest if he watched the Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth.
Sure.
Okay. Why is it in that movie that Al Gore's portrayal of global warming, and incidentally, just as a quick aside, 100 years ago in Albany, New York, they started keeping very intensive records of climatic temperatures, as you well know. The average then was 42.2 degrees, and today, 100 years later, in Albany, New York, same circumstances, 42.2. The bottom line here is in Al Gore's movie, not once did he mention solar activities and solar flares, solar cycles, as possibly the culprit behind a slight warming up that may or may not exist on the globe. I mean, how would your we've got a local guy that's an internet skeptic around putting on some evaluations of the data, a lot of which was drawn from Al Gore's movie, that clearly shows that there's some bad science going on. And just one last point, your guest says it's evil. It's just bad for corporations to finance private research, but no problem for universities to accept money confiscated by the government from these industries for government research that funds all kinds of activities, and they have, in fact, a vested interest in said research and those financial sources coming in. And finally, Kyoto Protocol, in my view, is just simply a way to shake down the producer nations to redistribute money globally.
David Suzuki, your thoughts?
Well, I don't even know where to begin on a response like this. First of all, I've always defended universities as a place where basic research goes on, where we have tenure, and so we're freed from all kinds of corporate pressures or political pressures. And one of the terrible aspects of universities is that universities, because they've had financial problems, have welcomed corporate money coming into the university, and it's changed a lot of the scientific practices in the university. But I've always felt that it's universities where government money, that is money coming from the public, comes to support basic research, and we're freed from the kind of commitments to another agenda. When you have a scientist working for the tobacco industry, or when you have a scientist getting money from the fossil fuel industry, it seems to me that it makes a lot of sense that now their pronouncements are skewed. They're shaped by the source of the funding. That's why university support is so important. I'm amazed to hear someone say that the universities are the heart of another corporate agenda. I mean, all of these other statements, Al Gore's film being biased, well, I don't know where to begin. Because of Ronald Reagan's failure or disbelief in global warming as an issue, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was set up by the United Nations. Over 2,000 scientists, climatologists. They spent 5 years examining over 20,000 scientific papers before they came to the conclusion that global warming is happening. And then they took another few years to finally say, yes, humans are a part of that process. The human imprint is there. And every year since then, the scientific community has become louder and louder. You have the National Academy of Science, the Royal Society of London, the Royal Society of Canada. These are the institutions of the leading scientists of the countries have been saying global warming is real, humans are a part of it, we've got to act. So then when I have people like your listener calling and saying, Al Gore's film is biased, wait a minute now, Al Gore has just presented what the IPCC and the leading scientific institutions are saying. So you can pick and choose and find all kinds of things that may seem to support your position, but you've got to come up with really definitive evidence that this overwhelming majority of scientists and the scientific papers are saying.
One last
so
question
much
for
of the denial is based on a point of view, and people don't want their point of view shaken.
One last question for Dr. Suzuki. Is water vapor a greenhouse gas?
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
Why is it not included in all the models when they do the models graphing? All they show is carbon dioxide. Water vapor is 95% of the greenhouse gas released by the oceans, seas, and rivers. How can man be responsible for that?
No, man is not. Water vapor is a part of the model, as is methane and CFCs and the many other greenhouse gases as well.
Well, maybe you should get that word to Al Gore, because he doesn't see it as part of the model.
Sorry, do you think climatologists are stupid, or do they have some kind of alternate agenda? You raise these points, but go to the IPCC website and look at it. This is, as far as I'm concerned, this is the most credible group because it's based on such a wide representation, and they've done a lot of studies. You raise these points of solar flares. Do you think climatologists haven't paid attention to that and dealt with that? Go to the website and find out.
All right, we must close here. George, thank you for your call. Sorry we couldn't get to everybody's calls, but David Suzuki, you've given us many action points here in terms of our own lives and in terms of inducing legislators to take our environment and environmental.
Boy, you need a lot of science education in the United States.
Well,
and I think it's instructive, that in Canada we've had the Nature of Things, a science program since 1960 in prime time with a large audience. There has never been in the United States in that time a science program on primetime television on one of the major American networks.
Yeah, on public television, certainly, but you're right, not on the
Yeah,
major.
but those are different audiences.
Sure. David Suzuki, your new book, David Suzuki, The Autobiography. Thanks very much for joining us from the San Francisco Bay Area today. Thanks to Charlie at the